I didn't really see the audience, but I can see that there are a lot of colleagues and friends who are joining today. So, Ayubowan to everybody. A very good evening to those who are joining from Sri Lanka, and a good day to everybody who are joining virtually from wherever on earth. So what we are going to discuss today is, give me a second, let me just check whether my presentation slides are moving.
Yes, sir, it's moving.
I think I have to get my view sorted. Can I please stop? Okay, I hope it's I'm audible and the screen is visible again, right?
Yes, sir.
It seems something has gone a bit wrong because I don't see the slides moving. Do you? So I don't receive any response. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, Professor.
Okay. Let me quickly check what's going wrong here because my PowerPoint is not appearing. Okay, I think I sorted it out. Hopefully, you should be able to see the.
Yeah, we can see, Prof.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much again for inviting me. And the Green Building Council of Sri Lanka has invited me for the second time. I can remember you invited me, I think last February during the World Wetlands Day, when we wanted to talk about the wetland conservation in Sri Lanka, where I made a presentation about the Arnavilunda wetland and its conservation and some aspects that to know about wetland conservation. So again, when you invited me for this particular talk, the Green Building Council, to talk at the Wildlife Day, I was just thinking, what should I talk about? Then this topic came to my mind. I even wanted to say where to build and where not to. What does the species say? Then it's not really the species. So the Green Building Council colleagues wanted me rather to say, looking at the wildlife conservation, where to build and where not to. But I changed it again, saying, looking at species conservation, where to build, and where not to. Right. So let me come to this, why I decided of doing this title change, because this is something I believe we should start thinking a little differently about, because the term wildlife has been there for a reason, but that is not the reason about which we commemorate the World Wildlife Day today. So you, have created this nice video during the intro, and it talked about nothing else than conservation. I hope you are the mic being switched on in one of the audio, one of the machines. So please keep the mics muted until we open for discussion. The wildlife is always aligned with the term conservation. And when we talk about the conservation, it is not only the wildlife that we are conserving what we call the biodiversity. And when we come to biodiversity, species or the species diversity is what we really to that in this talk. So Ivan again, and many thanks for having me in your talk. And let me just do a very quick round of walking the talk. So what I'm going to talk about today is we'll start with the World Wildlife Day. I did it a bit over the last few seconds. Then I'm going to talk about this wildlife, biodiversity, and the species, the term species. I'll come to that, but then I'm going to move away from this and say why we are talking about wildlife, why we are talking about biodiversity, why species, because we are in a triple planetary crisis at the moment. We are not sure whether our grandchildren will live in this very planet that we are living happily, thinking ever after, but it's not going to be ever. So we are in a crisis. At this crisis, we have come out with some solutions during the coming Montreal Convention on the Biological Diversity. We have come out with a global biodiversity framework in which the world has taken a challenge called the 30 by 30. I know there is a 30 by 30 challenge in Dubai about fitness. I'm not talking about that. This is the 30 by 30 challenge to protect 30% of the world by 2030. Because if not, we cannot be certain about living on this very earth the same way that we are living in. So to come to that, to come to this 30 by 30 challenge, I'm going to talk about the protected areas and conserved areas in the world. So let me come to that when I'm in that particular slide, but I'm introducing here something called OECMs. Let's talk about OECMs towards middle of the talk. Then the latter completely about an exercise that we are currently doing in Sri Lanka. Not me, it's a huge group of scientists. About 200 scientists from Sri Lanka has got together and working around identifying areas that we should leave behind for the nature to take its course in Sri Lanka. But it is not to be kept fenced and not touched. Those are to be kept open and sustainably while protecting the biodiversity in them, which we call environmentally sensitive areas, ESAs. So finally, I will come to this ESA identification in Sri Lanka, an exercise that we are currently busy on. And that's where I'm going to talk about where to build and where not to build, right? So to start with, we are in the World Wildlife Day. So let's talk about wildlife a bit. And this year, it's this year that the theme is connecting, exploring digital innovation in wildlife conservation, which of course is a very interesting, timely topic, I would say, because digital innovation is helping everywhere, including getting rid of this triple planetary crisis that we are facing today. So, and at the same time, the term wildlife is so important that it connects us to the planet. You'll understand it is not the reality, but we think we are superior than the nature, we are superior than the wildlife, we are superior than the biodiversity, so that we are a separate entity. Then the wildlife, that is rest of life on Earth, is a separate entity. And however, there is something called Earth that we live in. And the way that we are connected to the Earth in most instances is wildlife. Different experience with a leopard or even an experience with a cobra or a python connect us to the Earth, because we are trying to keep them away and live a life that in a way that we want. So, of course, wildlife is important to connect people to the planet. And in this talk, I'll talk a bit about the planet in the crisis. So let's come to that in a bit. At the same time, rather than digital innovation, sorry, there is a typo in this word, rather than digital innovation, 2 words, I'm going to talk about the technology, the use of digital use for spatial analysis, the geographical information systems in today's exercise that we try to identify environmentally sensitive areas in Sri Lanka. And that is what I have been kept on the side as a different topic, national scale up of environmentally sensitive areas. Right. So before going there, let's talk about these 3 terms a little bit. And species. Wildlife is what we use as the theme today, but in which I want you to look into the biodiversity rather than the wildlife. So if I start from I can start from left to right on this slide or from right to the left. If I start from my right, that is your left, the wildlife. Wildlife is not everything. Wildlife is the charismatic flagship animals that we see on our Earth. Has a huge diversity of life. So if we talk about the life on Earth, on the other side of the slide, you see the life on Earth have started at least 3.5 to 3.8 billion years ago. From there onwards, the Earth actually is 4.6 billion years old, and the Earth did not have life as we think until 3.8 billion years ago. And from there onwards, the single cellular life have given evolutionary journey that have brought 10 million different species to live on Earth today. So the life on Earth is a huge component that comprises today with 10 million species. But if we talk about the genes or the species that got extinct through this history, we may have nearly double, triple the size of the animals and plants that have been living on Earth over these 3.8 billion years. Let's forget about the past. If we take today's animals, plants, microorganisms, the life on Earth, we call it the biodiversity. And this particular biodiversity can be found in 3 major levels. We call them the levels of biodiversity. At the base with genes, and the genes are combining to make species, and the species are combined to make ecosystems. And in our environment, we see a diversity of ecosystems, a diversity of species, and we don't see, but we feel the diversity of genes. So the term biodiversity includes everything that lives today as well as in the past, starting from the very bottom of genes all the way up to the large systems we call ecosystems. The wildlife is just a component of this species diversity that we use to connect ourselves with the Earth system or the planet system, because those are charismatic, those are flagship species. We kind of are thrilled to see them, or otherwise we are afraid of them, or otherwise we love them. But the biodiversity is behind this wildlife. What we try to conserve is the biodiversity, which is an evolutionary product of 3.8 billion years of evolution. Right. So with that, we come to today's Earth. The today's Earth is facing something called the triple planetary crisis. Right? However, I told you the Earth has been evolving for 4.6 billion years, and it is a perfect system. It is perfect. There is nothing that you a system called Earth. And however, this particular system is currently facing some sort of a issue, which we call the triple planetary crisis, which is the climate change, pollution, and the biodiversity loss. And this has been documented very well in the scientific literature. I'm not going to go into details of technical jargon. Let's talk about this in a more lay terms. So we have a problem of waste. We have a problem of global warming, of biodiversity loss. That's what the scientists are saying. Let's talk about it a little more. But have you ever thought of this aspect that I have written on the slide? This particular very perfectly functioning system, which we call the system Earth, or the planet that we live in, which is the only known planet to have life in we think we are the masters or the rulers of the Earth. But real story is the Earth function without us. Without any problem, the Earth system has been functioning for 4.6 billion years. During this history, they have kicked off some of the species. The Earth system, the Mother Earth, has kicked off some of the species twice, right? Although we think we are the rulers of the Earth doesn't really need us, but the Earth needs wildlife. The Earth needs biodiversity. Why? Is what keeps the Earth system running. For the functionality of the Earth system, we need what we call ecosystem services. If the ecosystem services break somewhere, the Earth system will start collapsing from one end to the other. And we have seen 3 points at which the Earth system has started collapsing, which we call the triple planetary crisis. And we think we can solve it. But if not, Earth is not going to get destroyed. Earth will survive. We are going to be kicked off from the system. And that's my view of it. People can come out with their own views. However, recently, the Mother Earth has shown her power very well, clearly to us. She kept us in darkness for months. She kept us arrested for almost a year. So the Earth, the nature, has the power. And they have set the Mother Earth has set up some rules for functionality of the Earth system, and we have gone against these rules and created what we call the triple planetary crisis. And I'm not going to go into details of these crises. You know climate change, you know pollution pretty well, I'm sure, and you have heard of it, and I'm sure you have felt it as well. But let it come, if I come to the biodiversity loss, does it really matter? I mean, does it really matter if the biodiversity of the Earth, which is 10 million species right now, if it comes down to 5 million species, will it matter for us? What are we going to lose? The answer is already there in the slide. We are going to lose everything. Everything per se, everything that we have created as our heritage, our culture, urban environments, everything is going to collapse because the biodiversity, this 10 million species, which is a result of at least 3.8 billion years of evolution, is running this system called Earth through ecosystem services. And there are so many documents that are talking about provisioning services provided by the ecosystems, regulatory services provided by the ecosystems, and so and so. There are so many services. If not for them, the ecosystems are going to collapse, so that the Earth is going to collapse, and we have nowhere else to go. For example, have you ever thought everything that we eat, from the point that we drink the tea in the morning until a coffee in the night, everything that we eat and drink comes from biodiversity. Everything that we take as medicine, although they are created in pharmaceutical factories today through chemical formulas, they have been copied from the nature. All the medicine that we take came from the biodiversity, from an animal, from a plant, or a microorganism. And all the air that we breathe is being purified, cleaned by the biodiversity. All the water that we drink is being purified or cleaned or recycled by the biodiversity. So all these services are provided by the biodiversity. So I'm going to ask the question whether the biodiversity loss matters again after looking at these two photos that are in this particular slide. If I quickly ask you, what do you think is on your left? Anybody? I don't know whether the mics are muted by the admin. Okay, let me just tell you. On my left, on your right-hand side, that is Horton Plains National Park, which is almost Colombo. And on the other side is the city of Colombo. The city of Colombo, which is called the only capital city that is regarded by the Ramsar Convention of the World as a Ramsar city. So we have been conserving wetlands pretty well around Colombo. So there are several Ramsar cities that have been declared in the world. Among the Ramsar cities in the world, Colombo is the only capital city of a country. So we can be proud of the way that we are keeping Colombo in a greener and a blue or watery, I would say, system. It's not a natural ecosystem, but it is a man-made ecosystem. And it is in the floodplains of Kalani River. And this is where the Kalani River starts, the Horton Plains. And there is a system of cycling, system of, and as well as number of functions that are performed by each and every member of the ecosystem that we call Horton Plains, that is keeping the Colombo city blue down here. And if not for the functionality, if not for the, in simple terms, if not for the water tank functionality in Horton Plains and in the Central Highlands, we will not have drinking water for the Colombo city, because entire drinking water for the Colombo city is being provided by the Kalani River, right? And I'm not again going to go into details of these. And these are things that we don't really see. If not for these ecosystem functions, we are going to be nowhere. And therefore, if not for the biodiversity, who does these ecosystem functions, we are going to be diminished pretty soon. So with that, the world has come into some agreements. These agreements are going all the way 30, 40 years back. There is something called Convention on Biological Diversity. They meet regularly through COPs of parties. Through the conference of parties that they met in Kunming and in Montreal, they got together a framework for action for the whole world, which is called the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And with that, there is a challenge that has been set, which is called the 30 by 30 challenge, where the governments and the businesses in the world now can take a collective step to agree to protect the world as it is. Otherwise, keep at least 30% of the world on land, in the sea, as well as in the aquatic environments, in the way the evolution has made them to be, at the same time, allowing evolution to happen in those places. We need this 30% in blue-green environments. If not, the rest of the 70 is going to collapse. And mere minimum. If we can't keep 30% of the earth protected or conserved, I'm coming to that term in the next slide. Let's say protected for now. If we can't keep 30% of the world protected, we are going to have a very bad experience, probably in our lifetime itself, for surely in our children's or in our grandchildren's lifetimes. Not too far to Sri Lanka as well as to the world a bit and see what we can do for this. What we can do for this is clear. If we can put fences for 30% of the land on earth and 30% in the seas and 30% in the oceans or in the wetlands, and mark them as no-touch zones, we can build our environment, we can the rest of the 70% and be happy, but it is not going to be possible. We merely, with closing 9 billion in the future, we cannot really keep 30% of the earth untouched. We have to use the earth some way or the other. So that fencing and keeping them as protected areas is not going to work, right? Now, this is a picture of the protected areas of. Going to tell you a little bit more about the story of our wildlife protected areas. This is not only the wildlife department protected areas. This includes wildlife department as well as the forest department, as well as the CEA, Central Environmental Authorities protected areas. And you can see them in different colors on this Sri Lanka map in the middle. And you can see much of these protected areas are in the east and the south, but not that much in the southwest. And north and east, but not much in the southwest. But on the other map, you may see thousands of red dots, and all these red dots are critically endangered endemic species that are living only in Sri Lanka. Now, can you see the mismatch? the endemic species distribution in Sri Lanka doesn't really match the protected area coverage in Sri Lanka. So it is not only the, we also have an issue of not having the threatened species protected in the on the ground. Although we can say we have a good percentage, because Sri Lanka, we say we have 23%, nearly 23% of the country under protected areas. But if you compare this with the other map, you see we have not protected where we have to protect, because the protection has to happen in a way the biodiversity delivering us ecosystem services. And endemic animals and plants are evolved in those areas because those are the animals and plants who are providing the environmental services for those particular areas. So the endemics, or the animals and plants that are not found anywhere else but confined or restricted to a certain area, are so important, because that area is going to collapse if those species are vanishing. Now we have a problem. We have 23% of Sri Lanka protected, but not in the... Again, anyway, to come to meet the 30 by 30 challenge by 2030, we need 7% more protected. How are we going to do that? In order to do that, during the introduction, it was mentioned that I currently work for the IUCN, for the International Union for Conservation of Nature, Sri Lanka program. And IUCN has come out with another interesting mechanism, and which is not found solely by IUCN. This has been a debate that has been created all over the world, and many other organizations have contributed, and especially the World WCPA, and that is the World Commission on Protected Areas, that is a commission within IUCN, has come out with this particular aspect called other effective area-based conservation measures. So that means we don't really have to keep these natural areas fenced as no-touch zones. We are going to call them conservation areas in which people can do their activities, but that principles of sustainable development, so that conservation is happening in those areas. Conservation is using while protecting for the future, or using while protecting the capital for the future. We are using the interest. That is what we call conservation. And therefore, if we can introduce enough number of OECNs in Sri Lanka to bring our 23% to 7%, to 30% by 2030, we can say in Sri Lanka, we have done our bit for the world. And of course, we need to get the world to do the same as well, right? However, much of these other effective area-based conservation measures will have to target our wet zone, because our endemics are there. So then, as I told you, about 200 scientists, and actually it's a little bit more than 200 from Sri Lanka, got together on a voluntary mission to identify what are the best other OECMs, other effective conservation, area-based conservation measures that we can introduce. Came out with a concept called environmentally sensitive areas, ESS. And for the identification of ESS, we have used nothing than species and their distribution. And we have prioritized the endemic species and range restricted species, right? So I'm not again going to go into too much of technical details, and we are going with 5 steps in identification of these environmentally sensitive areas. And let me not read the 5 steps, because I will have each slide. The first step is compilation of species distribution databases. That is why I told you more than 200 scientists have contributed to this. And when we are doing this, observations or research that has been done on species have been added into a database with operational geographic units. So what is the operational geographic unit that we use? Which is a single square kilometer block of Sri Lanka. And traditionally, we would have gone with square will be overlaid by a square grid, and each grid will have a name and an identity, and we can add species to these grids. Then, with the global biogeographical analysis, we decided, no, we are not going with square grids because square grids are not natural. So rather, more natural grid cell system was introduced recently, and we adopted that, which is called hexagonal grid cells, which are more natural than square grids. We have divided the country into 67,408 hexagonal grid cells. And I'm going to skip this slide. This is technical, but this is just to show you how the hexagonal grid cells will give more natural patterning, more natural results when we use such grids than square grids in geographical analysis. So otherwise, GIS-based spatial analysis. And there is a paper that referring to here as well. However, what we did was we got these 200 plus scientists and we just put ones and zeros for 1,189 species that are living in Sri Lanka being restricted to certain areas. And this is not the total number of species living in Sri Lanka, right? And then then we scored ones and zeros and let the geographic information system handle those ones and zeros for our analysis. And this is the final statistics of the analysis that we have come out with. We have selected 1,189 species of range restricted species that included 16 mammals, 37 birds, 36 reptiles, 55 amphibians, 24 fish, 23 butterflies, 20 odonates. Odonates are dragonflies and damselflies, in Sinhala, Batkuro and Ginikuro, as well as land snails. So we have selected 8 groups of animals, and you can see on the top row the total number of species living in Sri Lanka. It's a huge number, but we have selected only species that are restricted to small ranges, endemic to small areas. And for these 1,189 species, all the distribution records were populated into 67,000 grid cells. And we found we can't do anything with that data. Why? Our data is so incomplete. Although our scientists are working for decades, we have not really recorded all the areas where a given species is living. Let's take the jackal, right? Jackal, Naria. අපේ map එකේ නරියගේ distribution ගත්තොතින් then you will say no, the jackal can be found here and there and that is not indicated in the map. That is because the scientific evidence has not come to the scientists who, there are so many species to work with. There are too little scientists and we don't know the total distribution data for many species. So that we found a way of modeling the species own distributions. We have modeled the species distributions where those can be found, again using a spatial analysis method, which we call species distribution modeling. And here we are using software called MaxEnt, maximum entropy modeling, and we are doing very interesting models to say this species should occur in these areas. These are for amphibians. And this is based on the amphibian specialists. There are about 30 people who are in this particular group, amphibian and reptile specialists. They provided the data and they modeled the data according to some criteria. And all those criteria were selected by those scientists. And then they can be combined into single maps. And this is all these three are endemic land snail species. And all the amphibians that I showed you earlier are endemic and very point endemic or narrow endemic amphibian species belonging to a genus called Pseudophilotus, who does not really have a swimming tadpole stage. These guys are called direct developing amphibians. Sri Lanka has evolutionary marvels inside us, right? So I don't have time to go into those details. But here you can see the modeling of distribution for land snails has happened in a different way, because the land snail specialists have told we need this level of radiuses and this level of confidences. And so this particular exercise is very scientific. Statistically confident data has been gathered to populate the presence and 200 range restricted species in Sri Lanka. And based on those species, we went into three very technical parameters, which are called richness, endemism, and rarity. And this is just for you to see that this has happened, right? This is how the richness has been calculated for a given species for just 8 grid cells. But in the real analysis, these grid cells has to go into hexagonal grids, and there are 67,000 grid cells, and there are 1,200 species. And this is just one parameter called richness. Then there is another parameter called endemism. There is another parameter called rarity, where you can see the calculations are becoming a little more complicated. And this is all done based on scientific methods that have been developed by biogeographers over decades of research. And finally, we got grid cells that are identified as important for these range restricted species, which we can call persistence or sensitive for stopping the extinction of these range restricted species. Then we also set another rule. So when we have these grid cells identified as sensitive grid cells, we made a map of them, and we again did a recalculation or otherwise triangulation to see whether all species that are found only in 15 grid cells or less. Can you imagine? There are species endemic to Sri Lanka that are found only in 15 grid cells. That is 15 square kilometers. That is it. Nowhere else in the world. And it is not only the 15 square kilometers. There are point endemics that are found only in 6, 5, 4 square kilometer patches of forests. So all such endemics, all the endemics that are having a range size of less than 15 square kilometers has to be included in this environmentally sensitive grid cell clusters. And all the species that are having 16 to 50 grid cells into their range should have at least 65% of their entire range in environmentally sensitive areas. Then species that can be found in 50 to 100 grid cells, at least 25% of their total range has to be in these environmentally sensitive areas. So that is how the calculations were done. And finally, we came out with this map. This is the product. Environmentally sensitive grid cell clusters. If a single grid cell is getting colored somewhere in Sri Lanka, we ignored them. We wanted clusters because we can't do conservation in 1 square kilometer block. We need at least 10 square kilometer blocks so that a population can be maintained inside that. So these are the environmentally sensitive grid cell clusters of Sri Lanka out of 67,000 hexagonal grid cells, right? The job is not done yet. because this is just Sri Lanka, but I told you there is a network of protected areas in Sri Lanka. We need to see whether we have additional areas outside the protected area network to make the 30 by 30 challenger. We overlaid the protected areas on the environmentally sensitive areas. You can see the light green overlay is current protected areas in Sri Lanka. These are protected under the Wildlife Department, the Forest Department, or the Central Environmental Authority. Then we filtered out areas outside the current protected area network, which are environmentally sensitive. And then we did another additional job, which is these clusters now need to be identified as Grama Niladhari divisions, or otherwise administrative divisions. If not, the Minister of Environment or the Central Environmental Authority will not be able to do anything. Grid cells follow when to these grid cell clusters, no one will be able to say, okay, this is an environmentally sensitive area. But if we say these Grama Niladhari divisions are situated inside a environmentally sensitive area, that can clearly be managed. In order to do that, we went into more deep analysis in the GIS, or the Geographic Information System. And there is one other thing that I wanted to tell you. In addition to all these small map, we have identified entire central highlands of Sri Lanka as one large environmentally sensitive area. This is something that we need to manage very carefully. This is where the Horton Plains is. This is where the Peak Wilderness is. This is where Thotapola, then Kirigalpotta, Sripada, and Pidrutalagala, Kikiliamana, Great Western, all these mountains are, and there are very endangered, critically endangered species and critically endangered ecosystems that are intermingled by the tea estates in these areas. We have taken that zone separately out. In the rest of Sri Lanka, we have identified these environmentally sensitive areas, and then we set, I'm not going to read through, and I don't want to read through these. These are rules that we set to convert environmentally sensitive grid cells into Grama Niladhari divisions, clusters. And with those rules, this is what we did. Okay, let's take one case as an example. This is Monaragala Kanda or Maragala Kanda or Geelong Kanda, which is identified as a environmentally sensitive grid cell cluster. You can see this is a cluster of hexagonal grid cells. This is identified based on that analysis. And now we overlay, and then our GIS can say this particular grid cell cluster has been identified based on these species. Don't try to read those names of the species, because those are in scientific names and you are going to tell something very different to their real scientific names. Don't worry, that's how we have to work with them. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 range restricted species that have demarcated or delimited this particular environmentally sensitive area. And there's no point of having this hexagonal grids cluster when it comes to the ground level management. First, we need to see whether the protected areas are there. Yes, we have the Maragala EPA, that is a protected area conserved by the Central Environmental Authority in the middle of our cluster. But of course, surrounding important sensitive areas. So we will kick off the protected area. And this is our environmentally sensitive area that we need to manage areas for species. And that doesn't say we cannot build in these areas. We have to build in these yellow areas with care. That care comes based on those 9 species that are found restricted into this particular cluster. The environmental ministry will come out, and actually we are now documenting guidelines to follow in this particular environmentally sensitive areas development, because that development has to be a sustainable development for sure. It cannot go for massive development, go as a massive development zone. If you want to make the 30 by 30 realistic by 2030. And then, as I told you, this particular grid cell is still, ESA is still a grid cell cluster. Then what we did is overlaying the Grama-Niladhari. And when you do that, you can see there are some Grama-Niladhari divisions which are getting selected because they come, or they cross edge of this particular grid cells cluster. So what we are going to do is we are going to kick those Grama-Niladhari divisions off. We are going to have Grama-Niladhari divisions that are encompassing a considerable portion of the grid cell cluster. And we have set rules for these exclusions and inclusions. And finally, around our environmentally sensitive area. If we remove all the rest out, this is our Monaragala environmentally sensitive area. Likewise, we have identified about 150 small environmentally sensitive areas outside the protected area network of Sri Lanka. That's been released by now with metadata for the, that is Land Use and Policy Planning Department. So Land Use and Policy Planning Department knows where these 150 environmentally sensitive areas are located. So this is going as ESA version 1.0 for Sri Lanka. And there's a lot to happen in this particular analysis. This is just a trial for which we took almost 4 years. This started during the COVID period, and through number of on e-meetings, virtual meetings. And now we have come out with one result, but this result needs to be further added with plant data as well as other ecosystem service data. Somehow, we can now faintly say where to build and where not to in Sri Lanka. Even outside the protected area network, we have very sensitive areas that we need to conserve, not to protect, but to conserve in Sri Lanka, right? And for that, the ESA policy is now in place. Sri Lankaවේ පාරිසරික සංවේදී ප්‍රදේශ පිළිබඳව ජාතික ප්‍රතිපත්තිය, the national policy on environmentally sensitive areas in Sri Lanka was adopted by the cabinet in 2022. So the legal framework has also been set. Now we can go for the 30 by 30 challenge. So that is my talk about where to build and where not to. And you can see with the data, even with the little availability of data, if we get the technology and especially the spatial analysis technologies of GIS into action, we can identify areas and meet the challenge of protecting 30% of the world. 30% of the world is needed, because if not for the ecosystems that are in those 30% of the world, which are providing ecosystem services for our day-to-day life, the entire system Earth will collapse. So let's give a big hug to all these ecosystems that are keeping us alive. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your valuable knowledge with our participants. And now we have come to the Q&A session for Wisdom Forum. If you have any queries, On his session, you can raise hand and ask questions now.
I may have taken the entire hour. Okay, I can see there's a question in the chat whether it is okay to share the slides. Of course, it is okay to share the slides. I may have to remove some of the contents because some of these technical contents has not yet been published. So, of course, they are now public because this particular video will go in YouTube. And the entire team that were working with the environmentally sensitive area identification has decided that we should now not keep these in publicly talk about this environmentally sensitive area identification for Sri Lanka. So I don't think I will have to edit anything. So I will share a PDF version of the slideshow with Tilaksha. Can someone read the question in the chat for me?
Why are the government organization giving permits to build in those lands?
A good question, which I cannot answer, unfortunately, because I'm not representing the government here. However, what I can say there is that we can have a hope, because this particular program is taking place under the blessing of the Minister of Environment, and the policy is already there, and the guidelines are now being written so that there will be a national policy and national set of guidelines. Ideally, using the power doesn't matter if the policies are going to be followed. So one can say that it is not the practice in Sri Lanka. But for now, we will have everything. What happened previously is that scientists knew things and the science never came into the policy. Now at least we have broken that barrier. Now the science is coming into the policies. So one step at a time, I'm sure we can develop this. We can break this vicious cycle. I know that land distribution right now under various themes, and it's going to happen rigorously in the future months with the elections coming closer. However, things will have to change, and as the scientists, we have done our bits and our parts, providing the guidance, and we are fortunate that the policymakers in Sri Lanka have accepted these as policies. Hopefully, the policies will come to action. Sanjay has raised hand. Yes, Sanjay, you can talk.
Yeah, so I think in the Maragala map that you have shown,
Yeah.
the species list, as I saw the Sri Lanka wood pigeon in that list.
Okay.
So my question is, what is the practicality of using those kind of species for declaring those peripheral areas as important areas, since diversity is a key component to have like sustainable populations, but
Yeah.
like in the central highlands is the like main area
Yeah.
for the species like
Yeah.
wood
Yeah.
pigeons. We know those small populations will eventually collapse because of the like low level of genetic diversity. So
Yeah.
using those kind of information, maybe we are like misleading, or we are like considering those peripheral areas into higher level for conservation.
Yeah. And yeah, please go on, Sanjay, if there is anything.
Yeah, that's what my point was there. And there's another like suggestion like thing. So those species you have used to prioritize areas for conservation,
Yeah.
but in the meantime you have used like all the data about the distribution of those species and the IUCN categorization.
Yes.
But do you have any plan to use those data to prioritize species for the conservation? Because like we know conservation has two different angles, the habitat level conservation and the species level conservation. So currently in Sri Lanka, as I know, we don't have that such like guideline for the species conservation for the prioritization.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you have like as a byproduct of this study, or maybe like suggestion?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for the question, Sanjay. You brought out very interesting and very important idea. Break the question into three, right? Number one, the data. How can Colombo livia or sorry, Colombo torrentoni or the wood pigeon be recorded in Maragala? That, of course, you also know that sometimes during the during periods, especially during weather weather changes, not the climate change, the weather changes. These species that are found in the Central Highlands descend down into areas close by. And in other, for example, rainy season, they ascend. During the dry season, they descend and things like that. So the records are legitimate records because these records are being compiled by the bird specialist group of work for this ESA identification, and they have recorded the species in that particular location. So there is no doubt about the record, and the value that comes from the record is not representing only the species population. Of course, as you correctly said, the population of the species of wood pigeon lives in the Central Highlands, so that protecting Maragala will not really have a direct impact on the species conservation for the wood pigeon. But think of the other way. During one part of the year, the wood pigeon will need something somewhere outside their normal range, so that they go into that particular area to fulfill that particular requirement for some reason. And that means there is an ecosystem service or an ecosystem value that is provided by Maragala Mountain, indicated by the presence of wood pigeon there. Although wood pigeon is not a regular member in the Maragala community. So that's the way to interpret that particular record in my all these species are representing some ecological or ecosystem value rather than just the species population, right? So that's okay. Number one question is about the data. Data is accurate and data is being well I would say managed in this particular project. Secondly, what's the value of having a species that is not regularly found in that particular area in order to identify that area as a sensitive area? So I think I answered both questions. And third question was, are we not going to use this data for species conservation? Of course, that should be the next and most challenging step, because for this particular ecosystem analysis or the area-based analysis, we actually model the distribution to model the distribution of species to come out with area delimitations. However, when it comes to the species assessments and species conservation plans, we need to go with the presence and absences. And happening under the Biodiversity Secretariat of the Ministry of Environment for quite a long time. As you know, red listing of species in Sri Lanka has happened in 1998. And then in 2007, IUCN Sri Lanka did a red list for Sri Lanka following the global red listing criteria for the first time. So now we are following the global red listing criteria. So we are identifying our species as critically endangered, endangered, vulnerable, and then near threatened and least concerned. However, the process is now being handed over to the Biodiversity Secretariat of Sri Lanka under the Ministry of Environment. So 2012 red list and the 2020-2022 red lists. I mean, the red list have now the latest red list is for 2012 red list. For some taxonomic groups, it's 2020 or 2022. And all those are being done by the Biodiversity Secretariat of the Ministry of Environment through a database that they are maintaining for now. But through this particular exercise, we have now collated so much of more added data, which can be fed into the red listing database of the Ministry of Environment. And that is going to be made into the species database. So there has been funding that has been secured to establish this particular national species database, and that will be used for red listing exercises in the future. So the red listing is going to be, we hope, that can be more regularized, and the database will be a rolling database, or otherwise it is a database that will be perpetually managed by the Ministry of Environment under the Biodiversity Secretariat. And now we are happy to, we have already handed over the data to them, and the data will come into that particular system. So the next revision of the national red list of have this data telling the story. At the same time, when it comes to the species conservation plan, for the others, knowledge of the others, Sanjay is working for the WNPS, Wildlife and Nature Protection Society of Sri Lanka, who have initiated some species conservation planning in Sri Lanka at the moment, and they have sought IUCN's assistance for species recovery planning. And that is one I would say preliminary, or I would say one piloting attempts of species level conservation in Sri Lanka. And we really hope other species recovery projects, or otherwise species recovery planning as well as implementation, so that the species conservation action to Sri Lankan critically endangered species in the future, there have been plans being made and negotiations being held with some donor agencies on that. And hopefully we can prioritize the most critically endangered species in most sensitive areas of country, using those funds that are yet to come. But when the good thing is, we have a plan, we know what to work on, where to work on. So that data will be with us. I took a little too long, but I hope I answered your question, Sanjay.
Thank you very much, sir, for the answering.
Any more questions in the chat, if you can read for me, because I couldn't really follow the chat window.
Sandun, there's one question. There's a quick question.
Yeah.
I'll ask. Shall
Yes.
I continue?
Please, Hemanta. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. First thing is you are talking about the animals, list of the about the plant and other plant, the botanical area about the district. First question. Second
Yes.
one is when you are analyzing this animal group, you have a group of people, group of scientists.
Yeah.
They are using their own criteria for each and every animal group. Are they documented, or is there any documented people can read, or normal person, or whoever the person who like that? Is there a it's published? That's the second question. Last question is when you are doing this grid system, what
Yeah.
about the agricultural area and those type of area? Those area has some of the animal species. How we can conserve those species as well as the people who are using the agricultural. Now we are talking previously we are talking sustainable agriculture. Now economic culture we are talking.
Yeah.
So how that will be affected to the this type of research at those things. Just
Yeah, so thank you so much, Hemant. And let me start from the last question. Not only the agricultural areas, even the Kagol town has, surrounding area of the Kagol town, Kagall Nagare avatat avilla environmentally sensitive area. And this is not a biased result. This is a result from the data that we have. So then what I want to say here is, based on the species that have delimited that particular area, what we are going to provide is guidelines for different land users in that particular area, how to manage those land users in a way of economic prosperity or economic profit making, while being in the sustainable limits of the nature. So even for agricultural areas, for example, there can be now around Nilgala area, which are outside the protected areas, will be included in one of the environmentally sensitive areas. So for those paddy fields, the recommendations for those Gramenladari divisions to the relevant DS, the divisional secretary, will come from the Ministry of Environment to be monitored by the environmental officers, that agriculture it's okay for the agriculture to happen in these areas, but they should follow these sustainability limits, these particular rules and regulations, because this particular species. So that is the ideal way for environmentally sensitive areas to be managed, because each environmentally sensitive area will be identified based on a collection of species, and therefore the guidelines should be given for that particular areas ESS managers, that these are the activities that are harmful for those species, so they need to be managed while the system is used for economical prosperity. So we are not, as I told you earlier, we are not trying to put fences and say no touch. What we say is, yes, this area can be used, but under so it can be a city, it can be a village, it can be a agricultural area, whatever land use is there, the land use will be given guidelines how it has to be managed sustainably. Which is, of course, many of you may thinking this is going to be a huge challenge. However, at the beginning of this particular exercise, there were many people who thought this would never ever be realistically achieved. But we have achieved something. So we really have a hope. Right. So that's the third question. The second question is about the data. Here we had to be very careful, as you have very correctly mentioned, because wrong presence data can make the entire exercise jeopardized, right? So that is why we went with a group of experts who the country has identified as experts of that particular taxonomic group. For example, I'm sure Sanjay was there in the bird expert group. So when we have discussions and went for hours in the online meetings with a lot of debates and so on, each and every presence of a species has been validated by the group. If not, just for a single person's word, it has not been accepted. And many of them are already published as well. So all the publications are being kept in a repository, ideally by the University Secretariat. And we know that until 2012, all the publications were systematically collected there. So hopefully they are maintaining that publication repository as well. So many of the records are supported by a publication or a photograph. And there can be other records made by real experts who the entire group accepts as an expert's opinion. So it is coming from the validation from the expert group. And for the animals, there were 8 expert groups: mammal expert group, bird, reptile, amphibian, fish, odonate, butterfly, and land snail. Similarly, I'm now coming to your similarly, there is a plant expert group, which is the most difficult group. So I was coordinating the animal group. So under my coordination, there were 8 taxonomic groups and nearly about 80 scientists were there altogether. I was able to get this data sorted and managed. And there are many more. There are about another 50 or I think about nearly 30-40 scientists who are working on the plants. And the plant list is so long, you know, that there are nearly 3,000 plant species in Sri Lanka. And there are species. So it's a very difficult group to work with. They are still working on the plants. So this particular, if you can remember, the metadata for this particular ESA file was environmentally sensitive areas of Sri Lanka 1.0. So this will become 1.1, 1.2, 1.5, 2 to whatever when the new data are added. So the plant data will definitely move it in with 1 digit, not only with a single decimal, but the ESS of Sri Lanka 2.0 would be when the plant data is added. Did I answer all your questions?
Yeah.
And as I was telling you, this is a process, and the process has started. That is the most important thing that we can be happy about. And this needs to be further refined and further validated and further utilized. And it has also come into the policy.
So with that, I think there are no more questions, sir.
So again, thank you so much for the Green Building Council for having me. I hope I was able to give a message that could go from mouth to mouth, because I really would like this message to be heard. And we have a hope. We really have a hope for 30 by 30 challenge, not only for Sri Lanka, but for the whole world. So let's contribute to this in whatever way that is possible. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So every good thing must eventually come to an end. As it is, we reach the end of this event. On behalf of Green Building Council of Sri Lanka, I would again thank you, Professor Sandun Perera, for sharing your valuable knowledge and committing to have such a successful session with us. as well as you all for being a great audience today. Around 1.5 hours, you kept quest and spent your valuable time to take part in this session today, committing your valuable time. We believe you gained some knowledge from today's session. Thank you, everyone. Stay tuned with us for our upcoming events until we meet again. Good night, all.